I'm David, and welcome to another episode of Camera Peeps, and please welcome back once again our colleague Andre Switzer.
Glad to be back again, David.
Andre, I'm very excited about what you've brought along today. Can you please...
More old technology.
Yeah, we love it, and I think a lot of people out there will love this video as well.
Okay, we've got here an RCA TK 76, and this camera was one of the revolutionary changes in portable video recording. So you've got to remember they were still using 16mm film. So to go video was sort of a bit of a, these horrible grainy pictures.
Sorry, that represents?
Yes, TK76 came out in 1976. This was the first version of them. They did use them up until about the early 80s. And other companies came out to compete with them too, like you had Philips, JVC, Sony. So they were all trying to get onto the ENG market, as it were. But this camera was, even though it was an ENG, it was an EFP for electronic field projection.
So does that mean it had a CCU on the back, or did they just make...
Generally not.
No, okay.
You basically controlled all the functions up here.
Yep.
You could, however, use it in a studio situation with the modification and actually have remote CCU operations through a multi-core cable. But they were generally used as a field camera.
And also RCA is Radio Corporation of America. Yeah, so it's a US camera, because we tend to just associate video cameras with Japan, basically.
Yeah,
this was actually
American made.
Okay.
Yeah. So they became quite big for a while. There's a few thousand of them around towards the late 70s around the world. So they were in pretty stiff competition with Sony and all those sorts of places.
When I started the early days of my career, Channel 9 didn't have any at all, but they were definitely on the road at Channel 7 here in Melbourne.
Yeah, well, they even had them in the studios in some cases as a studio camera. Now, you could get a kit that made it more substantial and changed the lens so it was more suitable for a studio application, but it was still the same mechanics. It just was a different structure, and you could do that.
But I do remember thinking, I'm glad I don't have to use one of those. Now, Andre, I noticed this camera doesn't have a shoulder pad, so that suggests it may have...
It most likely came out of a studio environment and has been modified for like an ENG application, but it could have been used for like a news break type situation, or some sort of very small studio arrangement due to the size of the lens. So they did use them a lot for that.
But I recall, so it was before I started in the industry, but the studio environments had generally had like a three camera chains. And I remember when these and I think Ikegami had one as well, and they often used it as the fourth camera in a handheld situation. So those variety shows, they could just get the low angles on the floor of the musicians and things like that. So that was possibly...
Yeah, a little bit like the GoPro of the 70s, I suppose.
Exactly, that's a good way of describing it, yeah.
But, I mean, the GoPro would be smaller than the viewfinder, which is here, which was just a black and white CRT monitor, miniature one.
Yeah.
So, primarily this was the handheld, get around, get the audience reaction shots quickly, all those sorts of things. Yeah. So they had a bit of use. They made some commercials with them as well, depending on what your budget was. Usually you do it on film, but the cheaper ones were done with these. Yeah. And as a news camera. And quite often they were ideal for live crosses into newses and things like that. So you'd have a link truck and you'd simply power it up. Now, there was two ways you powered these up. If it was sort of more for a live application, you would run the 12-volt power through the standard 4-pin XLR and just composite video out. Yes. Which you could do that way.
So it's interesting looking at this camera now. It's got this huge sort of heat sink at the front. So obviously there was a bit happening there, but it's 3 tubes, is that right?
Yeah, so three tubes.
Two 30-inch
3 tubes inside. Yeah, okay. Standard sort of prism arrangement. Yep. So now, being tube cameras, that was another disadvantage with this technology. At the time it was an advantage because they were able to miniaturise it to get it to be a colour camera. Because colour, you've got to remember, 76 for Australia, that was very, very early colour. Yeah. We'd only had it for a year or two.
And also I remember when I started, I hate using that expression, but Channel 9 had changed completely to videotape. They were the first TV station to change completely to videotape. The others still were running a bit of film and a bit of videotape. But I would imagine when this came out, it was probably like a specialised crew, and it would have just been dispatched to a court story or something when they didn't have the time to process the film.
Well, these were specifically designed for live ENG crosses, so that was the big advantage with these. So you'd have your live eye truck or your link fan or whatever you want to call it. this was the ultimate way of getting a picture back. They still shot on film and rushed that back to the studios, but this meant you could get live action as it happened. So this was the first of the really convenient, portable cameras that was of substantial quality to do that.
So this camera, Andre, what sort of switches and functions did it have?
Well, you could get gain, which was for low light conditions, so you could add +9 of gain in there. Now, it was already pretty ordinary without +9. When you switched it in, it was, if you're really desperate to get something in low light, you'd get it, but the noise was quite substantial. You had a colour bar reference switch. You had standby and power on. Standby kept the tubes going, so that meant that if you, rather than having a cold start, because it had to warm up.
Well, it kept the tubes warm, but it kept the VTR in a standby mode, so it's
correct. If you had it connected to a VTR, but it was the big thing was, especially with something, if you had to get something quickly, if you had it cold start, you needed at least 30 seconds before it could get a reasonable sort of picture out of it. So standby just kept it in idle mode, but your battery power was depleting still fairly quickly. And you've got a filter wheel, and that was pretty much about it.
And a VTR button. Is that a VTR button?
VTR stop-start button was up on here.
Well, a bit of trivia, because I know some colleagues will be watching this video, and there was a Channel 7 cameraman, Gene, who was famous for operating this camera, so we have to say g'day. And there's also another cameraman, ex-Melbourne guy who's on the Gold Coast now, Peter Tyrus, and his nickname is actually TK. And I'm not sure if it's because of this camera. I always assumed it was. Maybe he can get back to us. But I'll have to mention these guys because we're all from this era. So this lens that came with this camera, it has a zoom servo as well?
This particular one does have a zoom servo, but it did have other lenses. It was a standard sort of lens mount. So as I was saying before, in studio application, you could put a completely different lens on it. So this is pretty much standard when you bought the camera. That is what you got. So, I mean, you could custom design whichever lens you wanted with the kit, but this was just very standard. Yeah,
and I remember, once again, our colleague Gene, he had this, and I remember the Channel 7 guys had these Christie battery belts.
That's right,
And, it's a sort of big, thick belt, and, put the camera down, but to get the thing up and running, you have to sort of put this thing on, and the curly cord. So there's cables everywhere, and then if there was a portable light situation...
That's what you'd use this cable for, to power it off those battery belts or another.
Well,
it was pretty much like having a diver's belt wrapped around
it. It was, because if the light went on top, which was a Colortran Mini Pro from my recollection, with a 30 volt Cine battery belt. What was the name? Cine 60 or something?
I can't remember the name, no.
And a 250 watt 30 volt globe. So that was another battery belt, Christie or whatever, on the side. So they were quite heavy and quite messy to sort of operate.
By the time you finish, there's a lot of stuff to carry around.
And I think this era too is when a lot of the film guys bailed out to pursue their film careers, because it was many ways it was painful growing pains.
Yeah, well, film was still the medium to gather news on, pretty much. These were so still quick. Trying to come in.
The CP16, it was so quick. You just pressed the record button. You pressed the button and it was recording, no warm-up time or anything.
That's right. But so they powered them off the battery belts. But I mean, you'd only get a limited amount of time, and if you had a light going, you'd probably only get about 10 minutes on those batteries for running a light, depending on the condition of the batteries. And really, you had to be very quick and organised to get it done, and there was a lot of weight. Yeah, and you had to concentrate as well. Saving the battery, so you couldn't leave the light on. You had to all these issues. And that was the challenge for the live cross. If you were on location and you had a live cross to do,
I remember,
you would have to be very sort of sure when you were coming out of a break and make sure the light was on, and you had to have the light on to set your levels.
Yes.
And in a lot of cases, if you turn the power off, you'd lose the settings. So it was a real juggling act.
And of course, the microwave links were analogue, so everything had to be calibrated properly for it to work.
So, and a lot of the time, yes, there were lighting kits that were available with the link trucks, but the generator couldn't run everything. So quite often got left down to the battery light on the camera, because there just simply wasn't enough power to run all those lights. Now with LEDs, we're spoiled. You could run hundreds of them.
Yeah. So that's the camera. So now what did we record to?
Right. Well, that's a good question. So we've mentioned the fact that we could get the video out through a composite cable into the link truck for live crosses. So that was one option. But primarily for EFP production use, we had this, which weighs a ton, which was the portable 1-inch recorder. Now, it could connect up to other recorders, but this was sort of a preferred version. So what I'll do, I'll just open it up. And as you can see there,
that is amazing.
That is a 1-inch portable recorder. Now, oddly enough, it's got RCA, but it was really actually made by Sony. It was rebadged, so they must have had some sort of a...
I think that happened a bit.
Right. I think it did.
Yeah.
But in this case, this is a 1-inch one. So you could see how inconvenient this was. Just to bring back these memories to some people that might have done this, you had to thread the tape up. And I'll just quickly do this. Now, we've just got this machine out of the cupboard, so it's not been used for quite some time, but it is in working condition. So as you can see, it's a bit of a fiddle around to get the tape threaded up. So if you can imagine
still impressed that you can do it.
Imagine this, David, if you can look back, you're trying to get the late breaking news story or something done in a hurry, and you've got to go to all this trouble.
How much recording time would you get out of it?
You get 1 hour.
Okay.
So you've got to go through all this, and then hit standby. So what we're going to do is we'll just fire it up.
I'm impressed that it still works.
Yeah. So that's the head spinning around.
Yeah.
So basically, I'm just going to wind this through because we haven't used it for a while. But whilst it's doing that, so you'd close the lid.
Oh, you can still operate.
Still operate it, yeah. So what would happen is this would connect up with this multi-core camera cable here.
Yes.
You'd plug those in there.
Yep.
And you'd carry it like that.
Yep.
And with all the noise it made, if you were really lucky, you'd be able to do your interview in peace.
Right.
So these were generally used for the more production type things, for more commercials and all that sort of thing. News didn't terribly much use this because this was a lot more of a consideration to move around.
I recall, once again, before my time, big backpacks, and once again, if it was a big late breaking court story, I think there was like it was possibly even not a news crew, it was a production crew would go out to do it. I just noticed there's a compartment on the back. Is that?
Yep, the batteries went in the back there.
Okay.
So
we're talking BP90s?
Yeah, BP90s, they'd fit in the back, so they could go in there.
Just add another few kilos of weight.
Being BP90s, that would basically mean that they've finished their usable life.
Yeah. That's amazing. Well,
so that's pretty much in working mode there.
But even the engineering is pretty amazing there to have the reel stacked like that and to get the angle.
That's right. So basically,
the path.
If you sort of look at this, that's what you had to put up with. So it was all the mechanical noise that was required to do all that, and the fact that you could run the camera off this, but you lost battery power pretty quickly.
It's interesting. If we had lithium batteries back then, that actually may have helped a little bit.
Yeah, there was a fair amount of current drain. I'm just rewinding the tape now, and you had to rewind the tape. You couldn't just pull the cassette out where it was. You had to rewind it back, and that was another disadvantage with it. So with the lithium batteries, it would probably run for a lot longer, but for its time, I think you probably get half an hour out of a
I'm not sure
battery.
if we can hear you.
Yeah, that's basically all the...
I think
that's
there'll
the
be
tape underneath. So there's a take-up reel. You had to pull it all to bits to get the reels off.
I think there'll be some videotape operators out there that'll have tears in their eyes.
Maybe. But anyway, that's sort of probably it for the recording. And you could put other recorders on it.
Well, may I indulge? This was my era.
Yep.
So this is a PVU 50.
Pop it on the table, David. Let's have a look. And that took a Umatic cassette.
This would have been a game changer.
I actually have a Umatic cassette, but
this would have been a game changer as well because
it certainly
was lighter. This is just a recorder. It couldn't play back.
Yeah.
And there was another model called BVU 110.
Yep.
And it played back. And I remember that this was standard for most crews.
Yes.
And I think there was about one or two crews had the 110s, but no one liked carrying them because they were so heavy. But whoever had the 110 was more likely to get dispatched to the regional stories or wherever you have to play.
And unlike the other one we had on the table, this one could only record. The other, the open reel one, could replay
But there was an advantage with that because you could never accidentally record over anything.
Well, I think most people might have had a few near misses with that situation.
Yeah.
So,
and also remember an idiosyncrasy of these was they didn't like cold weather, and sometimes they wouldn't. You'd hear it sort of start up, and it wouldn't hear that clunk where the tape had totally wrapped around the drum, and you actually, I can admit this now, but you just drop it a couple of centimetres off the ground, clunk, and then it would finalise it.
Yeah, and sometimes that was also the solenoid for the pinch roller wouldn't go in, and if you gave it a...
They had a pretty tough life, those.
They did. Those are amazing workhorse, those things. I mean, they got knocked around and bumped.
That said, I was happy to see the end of them.
Yeah, well, for when they were developed, they were revolutionary.
All right, okay. Well, I think we'll leave it there. I think flashbacks for a lot of us, and a lot of people will be thinking, thank goodness I missed that era. So thanks a lot, Andre, for coming on.
That's all right. It's a pleasure coming in. We'll do it again sometime with something else.
We'll tap into another part of your collection, and thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
No problems, David.